Welcome to Braver Politics, a Braver Angels initiative. Braver Angels is a citizens movement dedicated to helping citizens learn the skills they need to communicate across political difference. Today we welcome Kera Birkeland, Republican, currently representing District 53 in the Utah House. We also welcome Kris Campbell, a Democrat who is running against Kera for the seat in what will be the new Utah District 4. Kris and Kera are going to participate in a one-to-one moderated conversation, which was designed by the Braver Angels national team. My name is Erika Munson, and I am a Braver Angels citizen moderator. So let's get started. First of all, these are our goals. More understanding of the experiences and beliefs of an elected official of the other political party in today's polarized environment. Discovering areas of commonality in addition to differences, and ideas for reducing polarization and dysfunction in your elected body. So let's agree on some ground rules. First, we're here to share our views and to understand the other person, not to defend our views or win an argument. Second, we're here as individuals, speaking only for ourselves. Third, we give our permission for this conversation to be recorded and made available online. We encourage viewers to watch the entire conversation and not take our comments out of context. Finally, we're going to stick to the process and the timing for each stage of the conversation. And I will ask you two to give me permission to keep you on track, even if that means gently redirecting you or telling you time is up. So are those ground rules okay?
Yes.
Awesome. Yes. Terrific. Okay. So, question 1, 1 minute each. Why did you decide to participate in this conversation? Let's have Kris first.
Thanks. Well, I'm running for office to counter division and bring people together to help solve our common problems. And so to me, this conversation is one opportunity for Representative Birkeland and I to come together and share our common interests, show that we can find that common ground without having to compromise our own values in the process.
For me, I have a lot of friends and family that are on different political spectrums than myself. And I think it's really important that, we all take the time to learn how to communicate better with each other. In politics, there's going to be issues that are divisive, and I think we are better served as a state when we can talk about those issues in a way that doesn't put people on the defense. And so much of that is our responsibility in the way we communicate, and it's something that I'm trying to do better at, and to understand how my words impact others. So I want to be more effective in how I communicate so that the policy can really be what's discussed more than anything else.
Great, thank you. Okay, let me ask each of you, did you see anything in common just in those last 2 comments you each made? Kera, why don't you go first?
Yes, I think, I've known Kris for a little while, and I think we both have a desire to communicate more effectively and to end divisiveness whenever we can.
Kris?
Yeah, I agree. I think this idea of bringing people together and figuring out how to communicate in a way that doesn't push people away but brings them into the conversation is a shared goal.
Nice. Now I'll ask Kris to go first on this one. Could you share something that Kera may not know about you?
Sure.
You have about a minute.
So when I was in high school and college, I spent 7 years touring the country with a drum and bugle corps, 7 summers. So the corps is called Casper Troopers. They're Wyoming's musical ambassadors. They're also known as America's Corps. We would spend 10 weeks each summer rehearsing 13 hours a day, performing, getting on buses, traveling to the next city, and I got to learn work ethic and responsibility and leadership. Our motto was honor, loyalty, and dedication. The Drum and Bugle Corps has its start from American Legion and veterans in 4 wars, so it's really about bringing some of those military traditions to youth to build community. And then it evolved into competition. So I got to travel all around the country performing in football stadiums. I've performed in Disneyland and Disney World. I've performed at Gettysburg. I marched in 4th of July parades in Chicago. I marched in George Bush's inaugural parade. So it was a really cool chance just to get across and see the whole country, meet people. I've seen all sorts of towns, all sorts of schools, and it was just a fascinating, really developmental experience for me.
Thank you. Kera.
3 years ago, I had an injury to my spinal cord, and I woke up from back surgery, emergency back surgery, paralyzed from the waist down. And so no one was expecting it. The doctors were like, yeah, just get up and start walking, and my toes were sticking straight up. I couldn't feel my legs, I couldn't feel anything, and everyone kind of panicked and didn't know really what was going on. And I spent the next couple weeks in the hospital doing a lot of occupational therapy and physical therapy to regain a fair amount of my mobility back, but I'm still partially paralyzed. I can't feel my feet, my calves, and actually my bowel and bladder are paralyzed. And so I'm on a very strict, if I drink something, I have to time myself and have a kind of strict diet program because of that. But you know, it's taken a lot to be able to walk and run and relearn how to do things that I once took for granted, and realize there's the opportunity to overcome a challenge. And quite frankly, doctors do their best, but sometimes it's on us to push beyond.
Thank you. Kris, what life experiences have influenced your values and belief about public policy and public service? And you have up to 5 minutes for this.
Thanks. Well, I grew up in eastern Wyoming, so small town, rural areas. I developed a real love for the land, a love for nature, and a love for the community feel. When you're in a small town, everybody knows each other. It's a very supportive environment generally, and it really brings together how important it is to work together. In the bigger city, it's easier to get a little more anonymous, a little less of that responsibility to each other, and so I really appreciated those values that I got growing up in Wyoming. My family has always had a strong sense of community service by their careers. So I had a grandpa who founded community colleges. My mom was a director of special education in the school district. My dad was a city attorney. I had an uncle who actually served in the Wyoming state legislature as one of 13 Democrats out of 60. So we're also used to being the underdog and the minority in various situations. But it's always been an important family value that everybody participates, everybody has a voice, everybody has a role to play, no matter whether you're in that minority majority. That it's all about that participation and collaboration. So I grew up in Wyoming, I lived in Pennsylvania for a while, and then I needed to get back to the mountains. So I moved to Utah 13 years ago, and I started following along with the legislature, learning what was different in Utah compared to Wyoming and getting a feel for things. And I found myself eventually kind of hiding every time the legislature would get into session, and ducking and just waiting for the session to end and hoping that the damage wouldn't be too bad. And I would complain to my family and my friends, about whatever crazy thing was happening that year and whatever bill I didn't like. And I eventually realized that wasn't very healthy, that I was just in this state of grumbling and it wasn't going anywhere. And so I had a choice. I could continue to complain and grumble and hide. I could let go and accept that things were going to happen, how they were going to happen, and learn to have peace with that. Or I could start to take action and start to get involved and advocate. And so that's what I did. I've been starting to find ways to advocate and participate, and now I'm running for office as a chance to serve and find ways to serve my community. I participated in the redistricting process partly because Summit County hasn't had somebody from Summit County in the legislature in quite a while. And we're split into multiple House districts, and to me it's important to find a way to make sure that my community has a voice in the state legislature. Representative Birkeland does a really good job of coming over and learning about Summit County and all that, and I would greatly appreciate that. And yet I still want to make sure that our community is fully represented there. I'd also like to talk a little bit about my values. So my values are integrity, honesty, collaboration, and service. I think it's important that I act with integrity, with alignment with my values, and that I speak honestly and truthfully, and that I find that sense of collaboration, working together with people in service for the community. I think of myself as a servant leader. And my goal then is to build a stronger community. And by that I mean, more economic opportunity. A strong community supports each other so that we all can achieve our goals. And a stronger community is a wise steward of our community resources. So all of those underpin how I would approach policy and public service.
Thank you, Kera.
So I was born in Montana, similar to Wyoming, but as far as rural. And when I was about 7 or 8, we moved to New York. I've come from a large family. There's 6 of us. We were homeschooled most of my life. I became homeschooled starting in 2nd grade. A lot of times in that process, it was up and down as far as our academic learning time. And so at some point it really became evident to me that my education was up to me. That if I wanted to be knowledgeable on something, that number one, I had the opportunity to explore the things that really mattered to me. And number two, if I wanted to be successful in something, I was going to have to explore things beyond what I was just interested in. And I learned a lot, I think, through that about kind of personal accountability, personal responsibility, and how that betters an individual when they take that upon themselves to achieve their best. And I grew up, when we moved back from New York to Montana. My parents got some land, and they had a big orchard and a huge garden, and we had responsibilities to, if we wanted money, if we wanted to go somewhere, if we wanted to do something, we had to figure out a way to pay for it. And so I did potatoes and pumpkins because that was a really easy way to make money that time of year. And just being and working with my hands, and again, knowing what I wanted to do and having to figure out a way to make it happen. I feel like for me, so much of my belief system when it comes to policy is that individuals have so much capability. We just need to let them be their best and not have it be intruded by other outside influences. I spent a lot of my youth, because I was homeschooled and I was extremely awkward growing up, I spent a lot of time with kids with disabilities. I felt so comfortable there. They took me in. They were kind to me, and I could kind of be amongst them and feel like I was doing something to benefit them, while in reality they were doing so much to benefit me. And so a lot of what I do today is to try to support and bring attention and help to those who were born with disabilities, and to kind of highlight their great achievements where they are in their lives. But I think a lot of my policy decisions truly are based on my principle that I believe truly in each individual's abilities. And I don't want a government to hamper that in any way, because I feel like, from whether it's being, told I would never walk again, to not having a formal education and wanting to be and do something with my life, like, people can do what they want with their life. They just need the right support and the right resources, and I want to provide that to people, and I make sure that everybody, honestly, growing up and being picked on and being kind of that, awkward individual that didn't feel included, I really try to always look outside me of who might be in that situation now, which group, which organization, which, who can we support and uplift. That's a goal of mine.
Thank you. So thinking about what you both just said, you've got 5 minutes to talk with each other about what you've just learned about the other person's perspective, and if you see anything in common.
Well, I definitely, for me, if anyone looks at my social media from like the last decade, they're like, I was just like you, just like, oh my gosh, the legislature's in session. Everyone, like, What's that line from the Hunger Games? May the odds be in your favor.
Yeah.
I was like, oh dear, let's hold on tight to government. And so I very much feel the very same way, that you kind of have to brace yourself. And I don't want a government where people feel that way.
Yeah, I agree. I agree that that's there in common. I also think it's interesting with the background from growing up in Wyoming and Montana. There's very much this ethic of, well, sometimes you're frankly on your own because you're out in the middle of nowhere, right? So you really can't rely on anybody else but yourself. And so learning how to have that responsibility, know that when it comes down to it, you're the only one you can to rely on to get things done, and to hear your story about, working through the polarization and all that process is all about developing that self-confidence and that experience to work through things, even when people are telling you otherwise. And then I think we agree that it's important that everybody has those same opportunities to have that growth. So what supports and what things can we put around people, not to do that for them, but to make sure everybody has a chance, or whichever direction they want to head, they can go that way. They know how to get there, and they have whatever help or guidance they need along the way.
Yeah. So. No, I agree. It's fascinating to me to hear kind of your story about. I never would have known. Like, you grew up in Wyoming, but you're right. It's that kind of self-preservation almost, and I think people from rural parts of our state and nation, they just have a different idea of what's work. I look at even my kids now, and I'm like, you need to go vacuum, you need to do this, and you need to go mow the lawn. And it's like, oh, these chores. I'm like, you have no idea what a chore is compared to some of the things that I did growing up, and I'm sure you did growing up. I think that strong work ethic is a benefit to us.
Absolutely. And I struggle with that as a parent now that I'm in more, I guess, suburban kind of areas. Yeah. How do I provide those same opportunities to my kids that were so beneficial to me?
Yeah.
As far as, mucking out stalls and, doing all that day-to-day work that you've got to do when you're out.
Well, just with animals, it's like the have-tos. Like, you don't have a choice. You have to feed them. You have to do certain things. And I think so many kids these days, they don't have that benefit of, like, you have to do it, or there's a consequence, right? Mm-hmm. An unfortunate, sometimes deadly for some animals in that situation, or even like trees and your plants. If you don't get out there and water and weed them, their crop's going to die. So it's a have to that I feel like is kind of missing from, I know, my kids' generation. But I value it now looking back, and I can see that for you, like, you had a very similar experience that I hope we can find ways to pass on to the next generation.
Absolutely. Agreed.
Thank you. So now it's time to talk about your perspective on the Utah State Legislature, and what are the difficulties in getting work done for the legislature. Maybe go back to those feelings you both said you had before you got politically engaged. So, Kera, let's start with you. So, what are your views on why the Utah State Legislature has had difficulty getting work done for the state?
Well, I think there's some positive things when it comes to getting work done. Not every piece of legislation or every idea is a great idea. So I think you don't want government to be slow, right? Because it's annoying when government's slow. However, you want them to be thoughtful. And so it goes through a process that's quite rigorous, and it can get bogged down sometimes. And a lot of times there are outside groups that just disagree with what you're trying to do, and they kind of manipulate it to something that it's not, and that slows the process down even more. I honestly think a lot of times too, it's the messaging, it's the not reaching across the aisle, not making sure that there's cohesion, and so when there's just this divisiveness, it's harder to be have something be successful that truly is a benefit to our state. I like the process. I like how we have interim and we study things that are of most importance, and I like our committee time in the House and in the Senate, vice versa, and then the floor debates. I think the process is great. What I worry about sometimes is our ability to really message and to believe the intent of those that are running legislation. I used to think that most legislators were just in it for themselves. And quite frankly, now that I'm here, there's really nothing that I get from doing this except a lot of people that don't like me. I think there needs to be a lot more public faith, and that puts more pressure on legislators. We need to do a better job of being honest and transparent and working with all the stakeholders on issues.
Thank you. What about you, Kris?
I think one of the big challenges that I see is that there's a big disconnect between what the majority of the people in Utah want and what the legislature does. And that's not in every bill, and it's getting better slowly, but there's been a number of big examples over the last several years that have led to that disconnect. So some examples include the tax reform bill a few years ago, where the legislature wanted to increase gas tax and increase food tax. And they came to those conclusions after doing a tour around the state where they were saying they were listening to the people, but what they produced as a bill didn't match what people were saying they wanted. And so there was a disconnect from the listening to what the action actually was. And people were saying, tax and food, that's going to impact our daily life, and that's going to impact disproportionately people with fewer resources and people with fewer dollars. And so that's not fair policy. And the legislature didn't seem to get that message very well, even after the reform. Some other examples include the propositions of the medical marijuana and the Medicaid expansion were two things that people had been asking of the legislature to do something about for years. And it didn't seem like that message was getting across, nothing was being done. And finally people were like, okay, we're gonna run our own initiative, we'll get it on the ballot, we'll vote for it, it'll pass. And then the legislature was still tempted to come back around and modify and mess with the original intent of some of those initiatives. Another example is the better boundaries, where people wanted fair districts so that communities could be kept whole and be fairly represented at the state legislature. And there was a whole process with a commission that went around the state and talked with people. There were thousands of comments submitted to the commission. It was this really collaborative process. It's what government can look like. It was really beautiful to see that interaction between the commission and people and coming together. And then the legislature went behind closed doors, drew their own maps, and ignored almost all of the comments that they got from the public in the process, and produced their own maps that split communities and only favored re-election of officials. And so that disconnect, where it feels like it's the people versus the legislature, and it's us fighting them, and we get that's the divisive language right there, us versus them. That fight, to me, isn't what politics should be about, right? It is our government, the people's government, and so the people and the legislators, in my mind, should be working together, collaborating together to find good law, good policy that works for everybody in the state. And I think we can find ways to listen to each other better. So I would challenge legislators to learn to listen better to what the people are saying. And it's not just a performative listen where you sit in the room and people talk at you and then you go and do your own thing. Listening also means taking that input in and taking concrete actions that match what you hear. It doesn't mean you have to do everything that the people say. There's judgment and there's balance and there's meeting everybody's needs, and you have competing interests. So yes, you need to make decisions in that space. But you can do that in a way that actually incorporates people's input. And then on the other side, I think we the people can support our legislators better. I think, I know legislators are always looking for information, right, on what do people want, what do people need, what do you think about this bill, and the better that we can communicate that in a civil way, I think the more collaborative we can all get. So I think it takes all of us coming together and finding ways to work together instead of against each other.
Thank you. So our final question is very much along those lines, which is, what can the state legislature in particular do to be more productive and do about dysfunction? What can individual members do, and how can ordinary citizens make a difference? Kera, let's start with you.
I think you described it very well. We need legislators who listen, who, as you said, when there are competing interests, can sit down with the group and are willing to have those meetings and those discussions, those phone calls and town halls and whatnot. And the people show up when you have them to actually explain, these were the competing interests. This is what was going on. Here's what, federal law says, and kind of break it down. Because I think sometimes as legislators, we just assume that people know things. We just assume, well, this is what we were told by legal counsel, so everyone probably knows that. But the reality is we kind of get in our own bubble and don't realize that there's not that information out there to the people. And it's on us to sit down with the people we were supposed to represent to make sure that they understand what's happening. And I'd say, as someone who did a lot of the hold on tight, we're in session type of, ideas and thoughts about government, when there are town halls, when there are opportunities to talk, we've got to show up. I can only speak for me. I've had experiences where I've had a town hall and I've had 5 people show up. And, I get not everyone can make it every night. Just because a legislator picked a date, people need to show up for it. However, there's got to be some give and take that way. I love what you said about coming together and actually wanting to hear from each other, right? I want to hear from you, you want to hear from me, and we want to try to kind of come up with some answers. What I really respect about you is you came to Morgan, to a town hall, and kind of listened, gave some thoughts, took some feedback back, and tried to figure out how would you try to handle that issue. And so I think there needs to be a little bit more of that going on. But I'd say number one, as legislators, we need to be more accessible so that the people know that we want to hear from you, and we need to explain. I have a bill right now that's a perfect example. I've had multiple constituents talk about an issue they're having in their school district, and they want some accountability for it. And I talk about creating that accountability. Now people are saying, how is that a priority? That shouldn't even be on your list of priorities. And so now these constituents are upset because that's a priority when they want their piece to be a priority. And how you make sure that everyone knows that you hear them. Tell me your priority too. Let's see what we can do. But then if you have too many bills, then it's complex. But really, it comes back down to if the people know you, if you're authentic, and you sit down with them and you take their calls and you meet with them, then a lot more can be done to establish trust. And that takes the legislator putting forth the effort and the citizen coming forward and being open and transparent and putting forth that effort.
Yeah, I think trust is a big piece of that, and it's been lost. Some of those examples I mentioned earlier eroded that trust, right? And so it's going to take, I think, some really thoughtful effort to rebuild that trust. And the way that you describe that, of bringing people together, people showing up to the meetings and the conversations, or finding ways, sending emails or whatever to participate in that process helps. And then the other piece is that communication. That yes, I'm hearing all these perspectives, and then these are the actions that I'm taking that are actually in line with what I heard, and not off in some other direction. So I think that back and forth is really helpful. I think there's some things structurally we can do. I think competitive races make for better candidates, right? When we get these districts that are so heavily tilted for one party or another party, and the candidates don't need to do any work to gather support to win an election, then they're not going to do any work, because we'll minimize the amount of work needed to do something. And so we need that competition to raise up all of our levels and abilities to actually represent and serve the people. So I think finding ways to make sure our races are competitive, things like ranked choice voting, which may or may not be the right approach, but voting like that allows there to be more candidates in a race, and you don't have to play the game of if I vote for you, I'm going to split my vote, and so I can't vote for who I want to. If we get ranked choice voting, we can actually say, here are the people that I want to vote for, and that allows us to get more candidates, higher quality, and more of these kinds of conversations going on to get us to better solutions overall. And then I want to go back to the civil participation, right? When we participate online, it's really easy in anonymous land to get nasty because nobody knows who you are. But I think really to be listened and to be heard, if we want people to listen to us, it does matter how we show up and share what we have to say. So I really like Ruth Bader Ginsburg's quote. she says, fight for the things that you care about, but do it in a way that leads other people to join you. And I think that's so important. So when we're, as legislators, as citizens, when we're working towards something, if we can do that in a way that brings other people along and helps them out too, we're going to get to something that strengthens our community overall.
Great, thank you so much. One last thing, what are each of you taking away from this conversation? Kera, what is it?
For me, more accountability to be accessible, more of a desire to understand better the positions of people that don't agree with me and why, and just, we don't even have to agree on the ultimate how someone voted or should vote on something, but we should understand the other person and respectfully disagree with what happened. And that's something that I know I can definitely work on. And you know, I appreciate you taking the time to work on this with me and look forward to our further conversations.
Thanks. Yeah, and I really appreciate the chance to really get to understand where you're coming from, like knowing the life experiences and all that helps me see you and understand you better as a person, and that makes it harder for me to be like, oh, that Republican legislator over there, right? I can actually understand better where you're coming from and why you're doing things, and that helps me to. And then I also feel heard and seen by you, so I feel like you're understanding better where I'm coming from. So, so it seems like you can appreciate better my perspective, even if you don't agree, and I may not agree with you on a number of things, but I think we can still keep that respect and find those places that we can agree on. And do you want to talk a little bit, mention what we're planning with the conversations? So one of these ideas of how can we bring the legislators, officials, and people together to listen better, we're going to partner with the Braver Politics initiative with Braver Angels and host some town hall-like events where people can come. We'll have a few different issues talking about, one session will pick 2 or 3 issues, and then we'll plan out several so that we can address everything from water to education to development. And the idea is that people can come, can talk with each other and listen to each other and hear each other's perspectives, and then bring those perspectives of what you learn from each other and communicate that to Kera and I, and have a discussion amongst everybody about those particular topics and maybe find the common ground on those issues. And I'm really excited because I think that opens up a space to really get to some quality policy and quality solutions. Yeah,
I really feel like on a lot of issues, especially when it comes to water and things like that, we're not far off, but we just have to be willing to listen to each other and talk about the best path forward. What is the date? I can try to look it up, but
have we set a date yet?
We were shooting for May 31st.
Right.
May 31st.
Yeah.
It'll be in the evening. We'll get a specific time, likely in Colville.
Mm-hmm.
That'll be the first one, and then we expect to have most of them in the September-October timeframe. And I'm sure we'll be posting the information on both of our websites and getting that out as we get the details firmed up.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being here and being one of the first politicians in Utah to do this with Braver Angels, and we're really excited and honored to have you be with each other. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for hosting this.
Okay.